Story number 1, The Midnight Visitor. It was a frigid winter night when the house felt unusually silent, save for the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me alone in the house for the first time. I had settled into my evening routine, binge-watching my favorite show, when a sharp, persistent knock shattered the stillness. The sound was rhythmic, almost methodical. I glanced at the clock. It was just past midnight. I hesitated before peering through the peephole. The porch was empty, no one was there. I shrugged it off as perhaps some kids messing around, but then the knocking resumed, louder and more urgent. My heart pounded as I moved to the front door, trying to steady my breathing. I cautiously opened the door but found only the dark, empty porch stretching out into the snow-covered yard. I stepped outside to see if I could catch a glimpse of whoever might have been knocking, but the snow was undisturbed except for the faintest set of footprints leading away from the house. They were small and appeared to have stopped abruptly at the edge of the yard. The sensation of something sinister lurking just out of sight was overwhelming. I closed the door and locked it, peering out the window for any signs of movement. The knocking never came again, and the footprints remained a mystery. The unsettling feeling stayed with me long after my parents returned, and to this day, I can't shake the dread I felt that night. Story number 2, The Shadow in the Attic. My family had just moved into a charming old house on the outskirts of town. It was spacious and filled with character, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The noises started subtly at first, faint creaks and groans from the attic, easily dismissed as the house settling. But as the days went by, the sounds became more distinct, footsteps pacing back and forth, muffled voices, and occasional whispers. One particularly quiet night, I decided to investigate. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, I climbed the narrow, winding stairs to the attic. The air was thick with dust, and the beam of my flashlight seemed to cut through the darkness like a knife. As I made my way through the attic, the light flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, I saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the attic, barely discernible from the surrounding darkness. My breath caught in my throat. The figure appeared to be moving towards me, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. I froze, unable to move or even call out. The figure seemed to notice me and turned its head, revealing hollow, dark eyes that seemed to pierce through me. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, scrambling down the stairs and slamming the attic door behind me. My family dismissed it as a figment of my imagination, but I knew what I had seen. I never ventured into the attic again, and every time I hear a creak from above, I can't help but remember that chilling encounter. Story number 3, The Haunted Hotel Room. On a business trip, I checked into a quaint, old hotel known for its vintage charm. The room was cozy, with antique furniture and a large, ornate mirror. Everything seemed perfect until I started hearing whispers coming from the closet. At first, I thought it was the pipes or perhaps the wind playing tricks. But as the night wore on, the whispers became more distinct, like a conversation happening just out of reach. Unable to ignore it any longer, I mustered the courage to open the closet door. It was empty, save for a few old coats and a dusty suitcase. The whispers ceased the moment I opened the door, but the unease remained. I tried to dismiss it and went to bed, but sleep eluded me as the whispers resumed, now louder and more insistent. The sound seemed to come from all around the room, filling the space with an unnerving sense of presence. The next morning, I mentioned the experience to the hotel staff, who exchanged nervous glances. One of them eventually confided that the room had a reputation for being haunted. Though they insisted it was just a story, I checked out as soon as I could, vowing never to return. The whispers still echo in my mind, a haunting reminder of that restless night. Story number 4, The Abandoned House. My friends and I were always drawn to the thrill of exploring abandoned places. When we heard about an old, decrepit house on the edge of town, we couldn't resist checking it out. The house had been vacant for decades, and local legends spoke of eerie occurrences and strange sightings. We arrived in the late afternoon, the sunlight casting long shadows over the dilapidated structure. The front door creaked open with a push, revealing a musty interior filled with dust and cobwebs. As we wandered through the empty rooms, the atmosphere grew heavier, and an unsettling feeling crept over us. In one of the rooms, we noticed a large, ornate mirror covered in grime. As we approached it, we heard a soft rustling sound behind us. We turned to see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, watching us. The figure was vague and indistinct, but it was unmistakably human. We all felt a chill run down our spines. Panicked, we tried to leave, but the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound of footsteps echoed through the house, and we could hear what sounded like whispers coming from the walls. We desperately tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally opened on its own, and we bolted outside. We never returned to the house, but the memory of that night stayed with us. To this day, we can't explain what we saw or what caused the door to slam shut, but we all agree that something otherworldly was present in that abandoned house. Story number 5, The Stalker. I worked the late shift at a small convenience store located on a quiet street. Most nights were uneventful, but one evening, I noticed a man standing outside, staring through the store's front window. At first, I thought he was just waiting for the bus or perhaps was lost. But as the minutes ticked by, his gaze never wavered. I tried to ignore him, focusing on my work, but his presence made me increasingly uncomfortable. He never came inside, just stood there, motionless and unblinking. His gaze felt piercing, as if he was scrutinizing my every move. I decided to confront him, thinking he might need help or was simply acting strange. When I stepped outside, the man was gone. I searched the area but found no sign of him. The next night, he returned, this time standing even closer to the entrance. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no trace of him. They assured me it was probably nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The man never appeared again, but I remained on edge every night I worked. The fear of being watched by an unknown, possibly dangerous person stayed with me long after I left that job. I still wonder about the man and what he wanted. Story number 6, The Ghostly Roommate. Moving into a new apartment was supposed to be an exciting fresh start. The apartment was charming, with original hardwood floors and vintage fixtures. However, strange things began happening almost immediately. Items would move on their own, and the temperature in the apartment would drop inexplicably. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps in my bedroom. I turned on the lamp, and to my horror, I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. The figure was a woman in old-fashioned clothing, her face expressionless and her eyes hollow. I wanted to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The figure slowly faded away, leaving me trembling and unable to sleep. I researched the apartment's history and discovered that a woman had lived there decades ago and had passed away under tragic circumstances. Her presence seemed to linger in the apartment, and while she never harmed me, her unsettling presence was a constant reminder of the past. I eventually moved out, but the memories of the ghostly roommate haunted me long after I left. The feeling of being watched and the mysterious occurrences in that apartment made it one of the most chilling experiences of my life. Story number 7, The Disappearing Child. One evening, while my husband and I were relaxing at home, we heard our young daughter crying. We rushed to her room, but she was nowhere to be found. We searched the entire house, calling her name in increasing panic. Just as we were about to call the police, we heard her crying again. This time, the sound was coming from the closet. We flung the closet door open, and there she was, sitting on the floor, clutching her favorite teddy bear. She looked up at us with wide, tearful eyes. We asked her what had happened, but her explanation was unsettling. She described a little boy who had come to her room and wanted to take her to his house. She said he was friendly and seemed nice, but she didn't want to go with him. The experience left us shaken. We couldn't understand how she had ended up in the closet, and the description of the boy was troubling. We never figured out who or what the boy was, but we took extra precautions to ensure our daughter's safety. The incident remains a disturbing mystery, and we often wonder about the child who tried to take her away. Story number 8, The Creepy Neighbor. When we moved into our new house, we were eager to meet the neighbors. Most were welcoming, but there was one man who kept to himself. He lived alone and rarely emerged during the day. At night, however, we would see him standing in his window, staring at our house. It was as if he was always watching us. One night, we heard strange noises coming from his house, what sounded like muffled cries and shuffling footsteps. The noises were intermittent but distressing. We tried to ignore them, but they continued night after night. We approached the man one day to inquire about the noises, but he simply stared at us with a blank expression and retreated back inside. Curiosity got the better of us, and we learned that the man's wife had died under mysterious circumstances years earlier. Rumors circulated that he was responsible for her death, though no one had concrete evidence. The cries we heard seemed to fit the stories, and the man's eerie behavior only added to the unsettling atmosphere. We never felt comfortable around him, and the noises only grew more disturbing. The presence of our creepy neighbor lingered long after we moved away, and the memory of his haunting stare and the sounds from his house continued to unsettle us. Story number 9, The Phantom Hitchhiker. I was driving home from a late meeting when I saw a woman standing alone on the side of the road, thumbing for a ride. It was late and dark, and the road was deserted. I hesitated but eventually pulled over, feeling a mix of sympathy and curiosity. The woman got into the car and gave me an address. As we drove, she remained eerily silent, staring out the window with a vacant expression. Her presence was unsettling, and the atmosphere in the car grew heavier with each passing mile. I tried to make small talk, but she offered no response, just continued to stare. When we reached the address, I turned to tell her we had arrived, but she was gone. I looked around the car and outside, but there was no sign of her. The seat beside me was empty. I checked the address on the house, only to find it abandoned and in disrepair. Later, I learned that a woman who matched her description had died in a car accident on that very road years ago. The experience left me shaken and questioning the nature of what I had encountered. Story number 10, The Possessed Doll. As a child, I had a beloved doll that I carried everywhere. It was a gift from my grandmother and held sentimental value. One night, I woke up to find the doll sitting at the foot of my bed, even though I had left it on the shelf. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the doll kept appearing in different spots around the room. Over time, the occurrences became more frequent. The doll would move from one side of the room to the other, and I would hear whispers that seemed to come from it. I could never quite make out the words, but the sound of my name being whispered was unmistakable. I told my parents, but they dismissed it as nightmares or a vivid imagination. One night, I woke up to find the doll sitting directly beside me on the bed. It felt like it was watching me, and the whispers grew louder. My parents finally believed me when they heard the whispers themselves and saw the doll moving on its own. They decided to get rid of it, but the nightmares persisted. Even after the doll was gone, I would often dream of it sitting at the foot of my bed, and the eerie whispers continued to haunt me.